It's that time of year where we start to reflect on the goals that we set when we were energetic, ambitious, looking forward to the year ahead. Now it's June and we're tired. This is my mid-year freakout tag. Welcome or welcome back, friends. My name is Tori if you're new. I'm so happy that you're here. We read a lot of different books on this channel. We also have my dog that snores in the background of my videos sometimes. If I can find who first started this tag, I will tag them in the description box below. We're gonna go through the tag questions. I will leave all of the questions that I'm answering down below as well if you'd like to answer them or answer some of them in the comments and let me know where you're at with your reading so far for the year. One of my goals that I set for this year was that I wanted to start using Storygraph a little bit more because I love Storygraph. I love how much it does for you in terms of statistics. Goodreads could never, but I can't ever fully move away from Goodreads and I don't know why. However, I've been using both of them very consistently this year. I'm really proud of myself for sticking with Storygraph. Let's go through some of my Storygraph stats and then we will go into the questions. So far this year, I have read 54 books, which has been 24,379 pages. Most of my books have been adventurous, emotional, tense, mysterious, and dark. The majority, 81% of them, have been medium-paced, 13% fast-paced, and 6% slow-paced. The majority of the books that I'm reading, 63%, have been between 300 and 499 pages, 28% have been 500 plus, and only 9% have been 300 pages or less. I have read 100% fiction. My two largest genres are fantasy and romance. I don't think we're surprised by that one bit. My most read authors so far this year, Sarah J. Maas. I've read 3 books because I did read/reread the Crescent City series in preparation for the 3rd book that came out. My second author that I've read the most from is Renee Ahdieh because I have been reading, or I finished her Beautiful and the Damned series, which we're gonna talk about that a little bit later in this video. And then S.M. Gaither, I have also read her Shadows and Crowns series to completion. That was a weird way to phrase that. Moving on. I finished the Shadows and Crowns series this year, so I've read 3 books from all of those authors. My average star rating so far for the year is 3.64. And now let's get into these questions. I'm trying to be a good nugget and answer these questions with just 1 book per answer like you're supposed to do, but there are a couple where I might mention multiple, and I'm sorry about it. I am indecisive. You can't make me decide. It's just not gonna happen. What is the best book you've read so far this year? This was very difficult to decide. I'm gonna go with Leigh Bardugo's The Familiar. I love Leigh Bardugo's adult fantasy. She is easily one of my top authors. She's an auto-buy author for me as long as it's adult fantasy. I'm not the biggest fan of her YA. If you love reading about the occult, if you're okay with things getting a bit darker, I would say in general, check trigger warnings for her writing. 9th House, the Alex Stern series, gets pretty dark. This one isn't as dark, I would say, as the Alex Stern series, but it does have some serious topics in it, so just be mindful. Contrary to popular belief, this one does not have vampires in it. I feel like that was a common misconception, and rightfully so, because this vibe, it definitely gives vampire. There's not vampires in it though. We follow our main character, Lucia. She is a lower class individual in this society. We are in Spain around the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which was a dark time. So that's why I said make sure you check content warnings. They describe her as a scullion, which is basically a live-in maid. It's borderline like indentured servitude. That's how it comes off, because I don't know that she's like getting paid by this family, but she lives with them. She isn't happy with her circumstances or her life. She has access to a little bit of magic. We'll just call them her keepers, but like the family that she works for finds out that she has magic. They start to show her off to their friends for dinner parties, saying like, do your magic tricks, do your little magic. She ends up being plunged into a world of seers, alchemists, holy men, hucksters, where lines between magic, science, and fraud are never certain. As her notoriety grows, so does the danger that her Jewish blood will doom her to the Inquisition's wrath. She will have to use every bit of wit and will to survive, even if that means enlisting in the help of Guillen Santangel, an embittered, immortal familiar whose own secrets could prove deadly for them both. She basically gets noticed so much because of her little magic tricks. She gains the attention of someone who is high up in politics. This high up political person wants to host a competition to find this magical person that's going to help Spain and help the king in their wars to come. The writing is beautiful. There is romance in this that is, oh, it just took my breath away. It absolutely took my breath away. I've never read a romance like this. I loved the hint of fantastical elements, but I wouldn't say that this is a super fantastical novel. It's very understated, even though it surrounds like magic in a way, shape, or form. It's fairly mundane magic, which I found quite refreshing. It's not like fireballs being blasted at other people. It's wonderful. Her writing is subtle. Her romances are also subtle and beautiful, and her writing will always break your heart. And that's what I love about her. So The Familiar was my favorite book, or best book so far of this year. However, as I said, I can't choose. So these are my honorable mentions. The Familiar is number one. Absolutely. These are just some bonuses. I read Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff. I love this series. I love it so stinking much. I think that his writing is absolutely incredible, impeccable. I love his characters. I love his characterizations. He writes characters. You will not like them 100% of the time. That is the point. And I love that. He also writes with massive, massive stakes. Any one of these characters can die at any given time. He does not care. He will make you cry. He will break your heart. He will do it again. He will make you cry again. That is his MO. I love Jay Kristoff. I love this book. This one does have vampires. And then the last book that has been a very surprising top book of my year so far is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. I read this book only to give Sarah A. Parker a second chance after trying and DNFing her To Bleed a Crystal Bloom series. I'm obsessed with this book. Dragons, like you have never experienced dragons before. The slowest burn romance you will ever read. This whole thing slow burn. I'm obsessed with it. It's also like I should kill him slash her, but I don't want to type setup. The writing is beautiful. If you like a descriptive writing style that's not overly flowery, I think that you will love this book. This isn't a sequel. This one was, so I didn't give a synopsis for it. This book, we have our main character, Rave. She is an assassin for this rebellion group. So if you like a character like Selena Sardothian, if you like a character like Cass from Song of the Marked, if you like Scarlet from the Lady of Darkness series, those assassin baddie girlies, that is Rave. When a rival bounty hunter turns her world upside down, blood spills, heart breaks, and Rave finds herself imprisoned by the Guild of Nobles, a group of powerful fae who turn her into a political statement. Crushed by the loss of his great love, Khan Vagor took the head of a king and donned his melted crown. Now on a tireless quest to quell the never-ebbing ache, oh my gosh, what a tongue twister, in his chest, a clue lures him into the capital's highest security prison where he stumbles upon the imprisoned Rave. Echoes of the past race between them. So this has been such a beautiful, gorgeous read. I can't wait for the sequel next year. Okay, it's been 20 minutes and we got through the first question. Love that for us. Next up, the best sequel you read so far this year. That's gonna be Fate and Furies by Helen Scher for me. I freaking love this series with my whole heart and soul. The next book, the final book in this quartet, comes out this month. I already have it pre-ordered. I love this book. If you're new to my channel, please read Blood and Steel. Read it. Read it because I won't shut up about it. And I won't stop hassling you until you read it if you like fantasy romance. It is the best hate to love in every single book. It is knife to the throat. It is one horse trope. It is man bun, forearms, double swords. It is everything that you would want or need in a book, and I can't stop talking about it. I love Helen Scher. She is my queen. This is one of my favorite series of all time. So I read this. I did also read Vows and Ruins this year, which is the second book. This one's the third. They're both sequel books. I love them so much. They both count for this question. A new release you haven't read yet but want to. For me, that is going to be Bespelled by Laura Thalassa. I read Bewitched last fall. Had the best time. I read it in like 1, maybe 2 sittings. It is silly goofy, it is spicy, it is tensiony, it is witchy. I love a witchy fantasy romance. I feel like most of the time I'm reading fae fantasy romance, which can just get tired after a little while. This is a wonderful witchy fanro that also has elements of like an ancient man, like ancient societies. In the first book, she goes to South America to find her familiar. She comes back with a panther and an ancient man that is trying to hunt her down because he thinks our main character is his ex-wife slash lover from like 1,000 years ago. It just came out in May. We left off on a massive cliffhanger on the first book, so I can't wait to get back to these characters, Celine and what is this man's name? Memnon. That is the ancient man. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I have multiple answers to this question. We have the second book to Bonesmith by Nikki Powell-Preto coming out in August, which is called Ghostsmith. This is a YA fantasy romance. The romance is very, very light in this. The magic in this series is so unique. The world is very unique. It was so much fun to read because I felt like I had never read anything like it before, that I highly, highly recommend it. It has like death slash ghost magic. It's giving Game of Thrones because there's this big wall that divides their world from the Deadlands where there's ghosts, there's like Reaper slash Wraith type beings. It's kind of giving Zombieland. And our main character is a bonesmith. She's one of the only people who is trained to take down these restless spirits. We also find out a lot of crazy twists and turnies about her past. The family drama in this is giving. Can't wait for book 2 in August. Then we have Us in Ruins by Rachel Moore. Rachel Moore writes the sweetest, most perfect YA, I guess it's more of a paranormal romance instead of a fantasy romance. They are just absolutely adorable. She wrote Library of Shadows. It came out last year. I read it last year. I absolutely loved it. Library of Shadows is such a good fall book. In September, she is releasing this book called Us in Ruins. This is one of my most hyped books of the year. Our main character Margot is on a quest to uncover and reassemble an ancient and cursed vase with the help of a boy who went missing in 1932 because it's the only way to put back together her broken heart in this standalone adventure rom-com perfect for fans of What the River Knows and The Lost City. Margot embarks on her school's archaeological trip to Pompeii. Sure, it's her first time holding a shovel, but she's got something no one else does. Lost teenage explorer Van Keen's journal. Poring over the poetic entries that serve as a map to the vase's missing shards, Margot finds herself falling in love with a boy who wrote it a century ago. She's shocked when her search leads her to a statue that looks exactly like Van, and then the statue comes to life. Catapulted into the present, Van is nothing like the wordsmith Margot imagined. He's all sharp edges, intent on reviving the relic for all the wrong reasons. But it takes two to survive Venus's death-defying challenges, and together, Margot and Van must excavate the treasure and their buried pasts before their story ends in ruins. She loves writing this trope of these girly pops falling in love with like dead boys. In Library of Shadows, our main girly pop falls in love with a ghost boy from the 1920s or 30s actually, around that same time period. And it is just so wonderful. I'm really excited to experience that trope again, but make it like Indiana Jones-esque. I think it's gonna be so much fun. The last book that I'll mention in this question is Lost and Lassoed, which is the next book by Lila Sage in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. The first one, which was Done and Dusted. These covers are just absolutely stunning. I can't wait for this third book. It's gonna be so much stinking fun. And that comes out in November, I believe. While I'm holding this up, this book was my biggest surprise of this year. I gave Done and Dusted by Lila Sage 5 stars. This was my first introduction to cowboy romance. I absolutely love it. I'm planning to continue reading the Chestnut Spring series. Like I just mentioned, I'm planning to continue reading this series with Lost and Lassoed. I am obsessed with it. This was such a delight. I gave it 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook. I immediately ran out the door to my Barnes & Noble to buy the physical copy of this. This whole series is like a one sitting. You sit down and you read the book and you have the best time, and then you want to reread it immediately after you're done. So, biggest surprise. Now let's talk about biggest disappointment. So we're gonna circle back to when I mentioned Renee Ahdieh earlier in the year, because I've read 3 books by her this year alone because I was reading her Beautiful and the Damned series. My biggest disappointment, and I'm not gonna use that euphemism, this was the worst book that I've read in a really, really long time. The Ruined by Renee Ahdieh. I'm not usually one to just like completely bash a book. I think I have given 2 or 3 1-star ratings in my entire like booktube reading career. I never give 1 star because this author put so much work into these books, whatever. I honestly feel like Renee Ahdieh wrote this finale book to the quartet in spite. I know that this series has a lot of very mixed reviews, and I think what happened was Renee Ahdieh said, every book I release in the series, the ratings get lower and lower and lower, and that's annoying. I'm just gonna rate this last book as like a spite book and just throw away this entire series, which was devastating to me because I loved the first book. I loved the 3rd book. We get like this new romance in the 3rd book that was so captivating. Like her characterizations in this book, impeccable. You care about the characters so much. As a character-driven reader, loved it. This last book, I'm just gonna say don't even bother reading the Beautiful and the Damned series, because unless you're not planning on finishing it, stop at the 3rd book. Don't bother with The Ruined, because appropriately named, it ruined the whole thing. For favorite new author, or new to you author, I just read this book like last week. I haven't read anything else by Nalini Singh, but already I know that she is a new favorite author for me. So I read Angel's Blood, which is the 1st book in her Guild Hunter series. This is a book that so many of you recommended to me after I talked about how much I loved Crescent City House of Earth and Blood. The angels that were in that series, all of y'all said, hands down, you need to read this book. This is where Sarah J. Maas has mentioned she pulled a lot of inspiration from. Totally see it. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. Every time I would sit down to read this, it didn't feel like I was reading. I was so captivated by the characters. I love the angels. There's also vampires in this series as well. It's a very interesting dynamic between archangels, angels, and vampires. I have the 2nd book. I am planning on reading more from the series. This is a 16 book series, which is kind of crazy. I don't know if I'll read all 16. Maybe I will. But next up, I'm planning on reading this very soon, is Archangel's Kiss. I will continue to update on my Nalini Singh journey. And speaking of new fictional crush, which is the next question, Raphael from this book, beautiful, stunning, gorgeous, amazing. This series is like a cross between Crescent City and like Supernatural. I just picture Raphael being this badass with beautiful white wings. He has dark hair with bright, bright blue eyes. He is definitely morally gray. He's an archangel, so he was very removed from his feelings when we first met him, we'll put it like that. But I just picture him walking around in like a crisp ass suit with his wings in the back, and then also he could also crush like a combat boot type, like more like grungy look and still look like absolute perfection. So Raphael. And then favorite new characters from a book that I've read this year has to be Sarkis and Hala. I loved Swordheart by T. Kingfisher so stinking much. This book was so much fun. These characters, I want to say I've never had more fun, but like this was like a top silly, goofy fantasy romance. Their banter was so good. Not even just banter, but the way that they would like joke with each other. This is kind of a friends to lovers type romance, except the love interest is a freaking sword. It's so good. If you haven't read it yet and you like more like comical, silly, goofy, I wouldn't call it a rom-com, but it does have like a lot of comedic elements to it. It was so good. The audiobook is also fantastic. Hala and Sarkis are new favorite fictional characters for me. Then the next 2 questions, we have a book that made you happy and a book that made you cry. For a book that made me happy, I never would have thought that I was going to love Tress as much as I did. This was a book that actually really intimidated me and scared me, even though I've heard it gives Princess Bride. It's so funny, it's so fun. It's kind of a cozy fantasy, but what really scared me about this book was that it edges on sci-fi. and as a non-sci-fi, very scared of sci-fi girly, I put off reading this book for so long. I've had this book on my shelf since last year, and I just read it in like April or May. Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson made me so happy. I was smiling to myself. I was laughing out loud. I was being so embarrassing. I could never read a book like this in public because people would be like, is she okay? Is she on laughing gas? Like, what is happening with her? I had so much fun, and it breaks my heart that Brandon Sanderson said this was like a little experimentation of his writing style. He wanted this to be very fun and playful, but he doesn't usually write in this style. I need more books like this from him. I would go crazy if he wrote, it doesn't even have to be with these same characters. If he just wrote a silly, goofy book series like this one, my needs would be met. That's all I'm gonna say. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. This is also like definitely a top book of the year. And I would recommend this for people, girly pops, readers, reading queens that are scared of sci-fi. Maybe try this one. If you like cozy fantasy that borders on sci-fi. And then a book that made you cry. I was a big dum-dum head, and at the start of Realmathon, I said, I wanna start with Magnolia Park's Into the Dark by Jessa Hastings. I ended up reading this book throughout the entire month. Like, I literally started it the first day of March, finished it on the last day of March. I needed time to emotionally process everything that was happening in this book. I cried a lot of tears. There was so much happening. I cried sad tears, but I also cried really, really happy tears at the end of this book. The Magnolia Park series is one of my favorite book series of all time. My heart has never hurt so much in my whole life. I'm really not sure what book I want to say as most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. I might say The Familiar because the end pages on that book are absolutely gorgeous, stunning, amazing, beautiful. I am signed up for the Fairy Loot Romantasy book only box, adult romantasy book only box. And the books that they put out are just absolutely gorgeous. Like, this is my copy of Lore of the Wilds. The sprayed edges with the mushrooms is so beautiful. I mean, just so gorgeous. The fan art is so beautiful. It's foiled, like all of this has foiled. It's just beautiful. Even this, like I almost like this cover, this naked hardcover more than I like this. I just think Fairy Loot does such a beautiful job with creating works of art out of the books that they put in their book boxes. I'm just not the biggest fan of the books that they choose, but that's another story. This one is definitely the most beautiful. But you know what? I'm also going to say, this is from Emmy, who gifted this to me, beautiful angel soul, if you're watching this. Spark of the Everflame. I think this has a beautiful cover as well. And it's beautiful because look at how floppy this paperback is. It's so floppy, and it's also one of the big paperbacks. I love books like this. I wish that all paperbacks were published like this. And the final question of this tag is, what are the books that you need to read before the end of the year? I'm trying to keep this to 6 books because I don't want to go through my entire TBR with y'all. You're gonna hear about it in the coming months. That way I can read 1 a month, and we have 6 months left of this year, which is crazy to say. I have Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. I have been meaning to read this for literally so long. I will read it this year. Everyone is screaming, crying, throwing up about this series. The final book is coming out in the series very, very soon. I want to be a part of that hype. I have FOMO because I haven't read this yet. So this is on the list. This is about a mortal world that's colonized by gods, ruled over by the Descended. Their cruel magic-wielding offspring, Diem Bellator, yearns to escape the insular life of her poor village. Her mother's sudden disappearance and the discovery of a dangerous secret about her past offer Diem an unexpected opportunity to enter the dark world of Descended royalty and unlock a web of mysteries her mother left behind. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know if her mother has been murdered, but it's giving like murder mystery vibes, which I always find so suspenseful and so much fun to read in a first book in the series. So I think that this will be wonderful if I can just prioritize actually reading it. Next up is a series I have had my eye on for quite some time. Because I love Tress of the Emerald Sea, that was sci-fi leaning, I've heard that this series is a good balance slash mix of fantasy sci-fi. So this is my other attempt to dip my toe further into the sci-fi books and the sci-fi genre. Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. This has really high ratings on Goodreads as well. Our main character is this assassin girly pop, so it fits with characters that I know I love. Her name is Sansia. She's a thief, a damn good one, and her latest heist on Tavan's docks is nothing her unique abilities can't handle. But unbeknownst to her, Sansia has been sent to steal an artifact of unimaginable power, an object that could revolutionize the magical technology known as scribbing. If the ruthless merchant houses who control this magic, the art of using coded commands to imbue everyday objects with sentience, can unlock the artifact's secrets, they will rewrite the world itself to suit their aims. So that's the sci-fi element. They have this like magic slash technology that can make objects sentient. I think that's kind of fun because it reminds me of Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So Foundry Side, I do have the second book in this series already. I bought it because these covers are really quite beautiful. It's a trilogy. I just don't have the third book, but we're just gonna count this as one book because I said I was only gonna mention 6. Then I have my final book in the Elemental trilogy by Sherry Thomas. I have been devouring these books. The first book was The Burning Sky. The Immortal Heights is the finale book in the series. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. It has one of the best elemental magics that I've read since the Air Awakens series. So I just want to be able to finish this trilogy in this year. Next up, because I loved Sword Heart so much by T. Kingfisher, I really want to get to her Paladin's Grace series. I love her writing style. I want to dive more into her fantasy because I did read Thornhedge, which is a super short novella, fantasy novella of hers, and then I read Sword Heart, like I just mentioned. But I've read T. Kingfisher's horror. It's just crazy because she writes so many different genres. She's a multi-talented queen. She's a multi-genre queen. So I just want to dive more into her fantasy because Sword Heart left such a strong impression on me, and I've heard wonderful things about Paladin's Grace, that it has that similar playful element to her writing. This is my challenge book. I have been wanting to read Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon since it came out. I read Priory of the Orange Tree. It was a life-changing book for me. It made me realize that I, number one, need to stop being afraid of chunky fantasies, and number two, the chunkiness serves a purpose. It was some of the best characterizations. It was some of the best romances and just like interrelationships between characters. The dragons in this world were impeccable. These are both technically standalones, but this is like a prequel in the same world. I have been meaning to read this since I think I got it last December, and now it's been 7 months and it's just been collecting dust on my shelves, actually on my TBR cart. So we need to read her. We need to find her a place, a home on our bookshelves and not just on our TBR cart. It is an epic feminist fantasy. I don't know how much more you would need to know besides that if you haven't heard of this book already. And then the 6th and final book that I will mention that I am dying to read before the end of the year is called Beyond the Aching Door. I will pop up a picture because this one is on, I think, Kindle Unlimited. I've heard that this book has a similar mood, tone, and vibe to A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed, which was a 5-star read for me last year. I loved it so much. It's like a folkloric low fantasy that has dark academia vibes. That's A Study in Drowning. I've heard that Beyond the Aching Door has those same vibes, except make it adult fantasy. I've heard it's a little bit spicy instead of the YA that A Study in Drowning was. I'm all over it. I am excited to experience the writing style. I hope that the writing style is as beautiful as Ava Reed's is. So that will be my 6th and final book that I will mention. I hope you enjoyed this, friends. I hope that you are absolutely crushing your reading goals. Even if you are a little bit behind where you want to be, that is okay. We still have an entire half of the year left. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to answer any of these questions or all of these questions in the comments down below, please do. And if you've made it this far, please leave a star emoji because we are out here. We are going to be reading 5 stars. We are going to find some favorites in the second half of this year, and it's going to be amazing. We are positivity incarnate. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the comments and I will see you in my next one. Toodles!